I thought driving 3 hours to my son's glass house on Lake Norman was just a mother's duty for Christmas. I ignored the ache in my arthritic hands and adjusted my hearing aid, telling myself to just survive the night. But when he wrapped his hands around my throat in his perfect kitchen, he made a mistake. He forgot that the woman who built his world could also be the one to burn it all down to ash. My name is Eileen Hartwell, and at 58 years old, I should know better than to chase after people who do not want to be caught. I had been gripping the steering wheel of my sedan for over 3 hours, winding my way down from the quiet mountains of Asheville to the polished, expensive shores of Lake Norman. My knuckles were white and throbbing, a dull ache that radiated up my wrists. The cold dampness of the North Carolina winter always made my arthritis flare, turning my hands into stiff, uncooperative claws. I adjusted the volume on my hearing aid, a sleek new model that I had paid for myself, suppressing the high-pitched feedback that sometimes whined in my ear like a mosquito. I took a breath and whispered to the rearview mirror, "I am here for family, not to be treated kindly." The long drive had given me too much time to think. I found myself talking to David again, even though my husband has been gone for 5 years now. He would have told me to turn the car around. He hated pretension. But I kept driving, my mind drifting back to my days at the Crestline Risk and Compliance Bureau. It was a job that sounded dry on paper, but in reality, it was an education in human nature. Decades of auditing risk and compliance taught me that the loudest person in the room is usually the one with the most to hide. I learned to smell the metallic tang of a lie before it even left someone's lips. I just never thought I would have to use that skill on my own son. When I finally pulled into the driveway, the house loomed over me. Carter is 34 years old, and he likes to tell anyone who will listen that he is a self-made man. His home reflects that narrative. It was a massive structure of glass and steel, decked out in white Christmas lights that looked professional and cold. There was no warmth, no mismatched ornaments from his childhood, nothing that suggested a human heartbeat inside those walls. It was a showroom, not a home. Jade opened the door before I could knock. My daughter-in-law wore a smile that didn't reach her eyes, the kind of expression a politician wears when shaking hands with a constituent they despise. "Eileen, you made it," she said, her voice a little too bright. "Come in. Everyone is already having drinks." I stepped inside, clutching my bag. It wasn't just family. The living room was filled with people I did not know. Men in expensive blazers and women holding wine glasses like weapons. It was a networking event, wearing the costume of a family dinner. I felt small in my wool coat. I found Carter near the fireplace. He looked handsome. I will give him that. But his eyes were hard. I waited for a break in his conversation to offer the gifts I had brought. I had spent weeks tracking down a vintage watch for Rory, his stepdaughter. The girl is 20, and I knew she loved antique mechanics. For Carter, I had found a rare first-edition history of the county, thinking he might appreciate the roots of the land he was building on. Carter took the bag, peeked inside, and let out a short, dismissive laugh. "Mum?" "Really," he said, loud enough for the group to hear. "This is just cheap nostalgia. We are trying to look forward, not backward." He handed the bag off to a passing caterer without a second glance. I felt my throat tighten, a sensation like swallowing jagged ice. I wanted to explain the value of the watch, the history in the book, but he had already turned back to his audience. "We are closing the biggest deal of the quarter next week," Carter announced, raising his glass. And the best part, I did it without owing a single cent to anyone. Total independence. That is the Hartwell way. I stood frozen. The lie was so bold, so absolute, that I almost admired its architecture. I knew exactly who he owed, and how much. My hand spasmed then. A sharp jolt of pain that made me wince and rub my wrist. Carter's eyes flicked to me, annoyed that I had drawn focus even for a second. "Ignore her," he said to the man standing next to him, waving a hand in my direction. My mother likes to exaggerate her health issues. She does it. Well, she does it for attention. Jade laughed, a tinkling sound that grated against my hearing aid. "Oh, you know how the elderly get," she added. I stood there, surrounded by strangers in a house bought with secrets, and the realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. I was not invited here because they missed me. I was not here to celebrate Christmas. I was a prop. I was the old, frail counterweight to Carter's image of youthful, boundless success. They needed someone to pity so they could feel powerful. Dinner was a showcase of excess, featuring roast duck that cost more than my weekly grocery budget and wine that tasted like oak and arrogance. I sat at the far end of the long mahogany table, trying to make myself as small as possible between a man who claimed to invent an app for dog walking and a woman who had not looked up from her phone in 40 minutes. I was cutting a piece of potato when my hearing aid gave a sharp, high-pitched feedback whine. It was a low battery warning, a simple electronic hiccup. I reached up quickly to adjust the volume wheel, hoping to silence it before anyone noticed. I was not fast enough. "Whoa!" Carter dropped his fork, throwing his hands up in mock terror. Is there a bomb under the table? Or is that just my mother powering down? The table erupted in laughter. It was not the warm, shared laughter of a family inside joke. It was the sharp, jagged laughter of a crowd watching someone slip on ice. "Turn that thing off." "Mum?" Carter barked, his smile wide but his eyes dead serious. "It sounds like a truck backing up. You are killing the vibe." I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. "It is just a low battery warning. Carter, I can fix it in a second." "Well, fix it faster," he said, picking up his wineglass. God, it is like dining with a cyborg from 1985. To my left, the man with the dog-walking app had his phone out. The camera lens was pointed directly at my face. I saw myself on his screen, a flustered old woman fiddling with her ear, looking confused and pathetic. I looked toward Jade, hoping she would intervene, hoping she would have the decency to stop a stranger from recording her mother-in-law for a quick social media laugh. Jade just sipped her wine and shrugged. "Oh, Eileen? Relax. He is only joking. You know how funny he gets when he has an audience." I looked around the table. I scanned every face, searching for a shred of empathy. I found only averted eyes and amused smirks. They were all complicit. To them, I was not a person. I was entertainment. "Stop it," a small voice said. It was Rory. My granddaughter sat across from me, her hands clenched in her lap. She looked pale. "That is not funny." "Carter, don't." Carter cut her off with the precision of a surgeon. He did not even raise his voice. He just leaned forward slightly, resting his elbows on the table. "Rory," he said, his tone smooth and dangerous. "You are feeling bold tonight. I wonder if that boldness will help you at the internship I secured for you next month. You know, the one you got purely because I made a phone call? It would be a shame if they found out you lack the temperament for the corporate world." Rory's mouth snapped shut. The threat was clear. "Shut up, or I will destroy your future." She looked down at her plate, her face burning, and did not speak again, satisfied that he had crushed the only rebellion in the room. Carter turned his attention back to me. His expression shifted from mockery to a performance of deep, troubled concern. "Mom, honestly, we need to talk about your living situation," he said, swirling his wine. "Have you looked at any facilities yet? Assisted living, you are clearly struggling to manage the basics. I can't have people thinking I'm letting my mother rot in some mountain shack. It is a bad look for the family brand." The room went quiet. He was not asking about my welfare. He was framing me as a liability. He was suggesting that my existence was a stain on his reputation that needed to be scrubbed clean. A year ago, I might have cried. I might have pleaded that I was perfectly capable, that I still hiked 3 miles a week and managed my own investments. But tonight, something inside me clicked off. The hurt did not vanish, but it calcified. It turned into something cold and hard. I did not explode. I did not throw my wine in his face. I went completely still. My breathing leveled out. I stopped seeing him as my son and started seeing him as I used to see the fraudulent CEOs I audited at Crestline. I looked at his hands, twitching slightly on the stem of his glass. I looked at the sweat beading on his upper lip despite the cool air. I was no longer a mother. I was an auditor, and he was a file full of irregularities. Jade reached out and touched Carter's arm, sensing the shift in the air but misinterpreting it completely. "Okay. Honey, don't go too far," she said, though her voice lacked any real reprimand. Then she looked at me, her eyes filled with a patronizing pity. "Mom's is just sensitive. You know that. It is hard to live in the real world when you are that fragile." I looked at her, then at Carter. I understood perfectly now. They did not just want to mock me. They wanted to break me. They wanted me to believe I was weak, senile, and powerless, so that I would hand over whatever agency I had left. They had absolutely no idea that the battery in my hearing aid was fine. I had turned it down, not off, and I was hearing every single word. The dinner party eventually migrated toward the expansive living room, leaving the dining table littered with half-empty wine glasses and crumpled napkins. I did not join the exodus. I stayed behind, pretending to examine a painting on the wall, hoping to slip away unnoticed once the noise level rose. But Carter was watching me. He had been watching me the entire evening, tracking my lack of applause during his toasts and my refusal to smile at his jokes. He intercepted me near the corridor that led to the guest bathroom. His grip on my upper arm was firm, fingers digging into the soft wool of my sweater, steering me away from the party and into the shadows of the hallway. The music from the living room faded into a dull thrum. "You are making a scene by not being part of the scene," Carter hissed, his voice low and vibrating with annoyance. "Would it kill you to look happy for me?" Just once I pulled my arm free and looked up at him. The alcohol on his breath was sharp and acrid. "Con," I said, using the nickname I hadn't used since he was a boy, my voice barely a whisper. "You embarrass me." Carter froze. His face contorted, shifting from annoyance to something ugly and raw. "I embarrass you," he repeated, stepping into my personal space until I was pressed against the wall. "No, you embarrass me. You walk in here with your cheap coat and your hearing aid whining, looking like a charity case I have to feed. Carter." "Don't," he snapped, cutting me off. I am sick of it. I am sick of you acting like a victim. You hold me back. You have always held me back because you are too small for the life I built. You don't deserve to sit in this house. Then, the world tilted. It happened so fast my brain struggled to process the sequence. Carter's hand shot out and clamped around my throat. It was not a warning squeeze. It was an act of violence. He shoved me back against the plaster, his thumb digging into my windpipe, cutting off my air supply. My vision sparked with white spots. I could feel the pulse hammering in my ears, a frantic drumbeat of panic. I stared into my son's eyes and saw a stranger. There was no hesitation there, only a terrifying release of pent-up loathing. You are nothing. Carter spat the words into my face, his spittle hitting my cheek. Just a useless old weight dragging me down. I should have left you to rot in Asheville. I did not claw at his face. I did not kick. My training kicked in, cold and analytical even as my lungs burned for oxygen. Conserve energy, observe. I went limp against the wall, my hands dropping to my sides. Buzz. A sharp vibration circled my left ring finger, my smart ring, a discreet piece of titanium I used to track my sleep and heart rate, had detected the sudden, violent spike in my vitals and the impact against the wall. The SOS protocol had initiated. It was recording audio now. It was broadcasting my location. Carter suddenly let go, stepping back as the sound of heels clicking on the hardwood floor approached. I slumped slightly, gasping for air, my hand flying to my throat instinctively. Jade appeared at the end of the hallway. She looked at me, leaning against the wall with a red blotch forming on my neck. And then she looked at her husband, who was straightening his cuffs. She did not ask if I was okay. She rolled her eyes. Oh, for God's sake. Jade sighed, crossing her arms. What script is Mom acting out now? Did she faint? Please tell me she didn't faint. I swallowed, the pain radiating down my esophagus. I looked at Jade, then at Carter. The mask was back on his face, but I had seen what lay beneath. Con. I rasped, my voice sounding like gravel. You just chose who you are. So did I. Carter leaned in close again, lowering his voice so Jade wouldn't hear the specific malice in it. If you say a word about this, he whispered, I will make sure no one believes you. I will tell them you are losing your mind. You are old. You are imagining things. Who are they going to believe, the successful CEO or the confused old widow? He smirked, confident in his leverage. I straightened my sweater. I adjusted my scarf to cover the developing bruise on my neck. Without another word, I walked past them. I walked back into the living room, navigated through the crowd of laughing strangers, and nodded politely to the man with the dog walking app. Good night, I said softly. Lovely evening. I picked up my coat from the rack near the door. My hands were steady. My heart was cold. I walked out into the biting winter air, and as the heavy front door clicked shut behind me, the silence was no longer a sign of defeat. It was the sound of a verdict being sealed. I sat in the driver's seat of my sedan, the engine cold and silent. Through the windshield, the glass house on the hill looked like a lighthouse, blazing with electricity against the dark December sky. It was beautiful, objectively speaking, but people always mistake light for warmth. They see the shine and assume there is a hearth inside. But I knew the truth as I stared at the geometric sharp lines of my son's estate. It was just a refrigerator with a view. I reached into my bag and pulled out my laptop. My hands which had throbbed with arthritis earlier that evening, were now strangely steady. Adrenaline is a powerful stabilizer. I booted up the machine, the blue glow illuminating my face in the dark car, and navigated to a folder buried deep within my encrypted drive. The folder was named simply Blue Heron Records to the world. Blue Heron Capital LLC was a faceless boutique investment firm based in Delaware. To Carter. It was the angel investor that had swooped in 5 years ago when his first startup was bleeding cash and the creditors were circling like sharks. He thought he had charmed a group of anonymous venture capitalists with his charisma and his pitch deck. He had no idea he was actually pitching to his mother's retirement fund and insurance payouts. I did not do it to control him. I did not do it to buy his love. I did it because I knew he would rather starve than take a check from me. He needed a savior that looked like success, not a mother who looked like a burden. So, I became the silent partner he bragged about at cocktail parties. I signed the checks that paid for the glass walls he just tried to crush me against. I clicked on a subfolder labeled Legal Agreements. I scrolled past the cap tables and the vesting schedules until I found the document I needed, Shareholder Agreement Conduct Addendum. I had insisted my lawyers insert it. Clause 4, Section B, the Morals Clause. It gave the primary investor the right to freeze assets and revoke executive powers in the event of gross misconduct or criminal behavior. I opened the audio file that had just synced from my smart ring. I pressed play. The sound was crisp, amplified by the high-quality microphone I had set up for health monitoring. You are nothing, just a useless old weight dragging me down. I should have left you to rot in Asheville. Then came the sickening sound of breath hitching and fabric tearing. I stopped the playback. I did not feel a rush of victory. I did not feel the satisfaction of holding a winning hand. I felt a cold, hollowing grief that settled in my marrow. My son was dead to me, not because I killed him, but because he had killed the part of himself that was human. I picked up my phone and dialed a number I knew by heart. It rang twice. Meredith, I said. My voice was flat, devoid of the tremor that had been there 10 minutes ago. Eileen, it is late. Is everything all right? Activate the Greystone Protocol. First thing tomorrow morning. There was a pause on the other end, a moment of professional hesitation. Are you sure? Once we pull that lever. I am sure. He breached the morals clause. I have the audio evidence. Prepare the filings. I hung up and turned back to the laptop. I had 3 drafts saved in my outbox, templates I had prayed I would never have to use. The first was to the board of directors of Carter's company, notifying them of an emergency vote of no confidence. The second was to the bank holding the corporate credit line, alerting them that the personal guarantee from Blue Heron Capital was being withdrawn effective immediately. The third was to the Committee of the Lakeside Business Honors. I filled in the subject line. Urgent disqualification of candidate regarding ethical standards. I hit send on all 3. 1, 2, 3. It took less than 10 seconds to dismantle a decade of his ego. I shut the laptop and placed it on the passenger seat. I started the car, the engine purring to life. I did not look back at the house as I reversed out of the driveway. As I pulled out onto the main road, the silence in the car felt heavy. But it was no longer the silence of a victim. It was the sharp, clean silence of a guillotine blade that had already fallen. The first domino fell at 12 minutes past 6 in the morning. I was already awake, sitting in a generic motel room chair, watching the steam rise from a cup of bitter coffee. I did not need to be in the room with him to know exactly how the scene played out. I had designed the timing myself. Carter woke up to the vibration of his phone on the nightstand. The screen lit up with a notification that would make any CEO's blood run cold. Urgent board meeting emergency session. There was no context, no polite explanation, just a cold summons from the corporate secretary I had alerted hours ago. 8 minutes later, at 20 minutes past 6, the second blade dropped. His personal banker called him. I knew the man. A nervous fellow who hated conflict. So I knew he would be concise. He would have told Carter that the primary guarantor for his business loans, Blue Heron Capital, was exercising its right to withdraw support under Clause X. The terms were absolute. Carter needed to post additional liquid collateral covering 80% of the outstanding debt within 48 hours, or the bank would seize the assets. By 33 minutes past 6, the chaos had spread to the other side of the bed. Jade's phone rang. It was the PR agency handling the gala for that evening. "We have a problem with the award ceremony," the agent would have said. "The committee received a formal complaint with attached evidence. They are talking about pulling the honor." Carter did not think of me. Not yet. His arrogance is a fortress that does not crumble easily. In his mind, this was a coordinated attack by a business rival, some competitor trying to sabotage his moment of glory. He started screaming at his phone, calling his chief financial officer, demanding a full background check on Blue Heron Capital. "Find out who they are," he likely shouted, pacing the floor of his glass house. "I want to know who is behind the shell company. Find me a name." That was when the CFO delivered the news that must have felt like a punch to the gut. Blue Heron wasn't just a passive wallet. In the original agreement, the one Carter had signed 5 years ago without reading because he was too busy admiring his own signature, Blue Heron retained veto power over executive leadership in times of crisis. They are not just investors. Carter, the CFO admitted. Technically, they own the chair you are sitting in. At 7 o'clock sharp, my phone rang. I watched the name Carter flash on the screen. I let it ring. Once, twice, 3 times. I did not feel the urge to answer. I did not feel the maternal pull to soothe him. I simply pressed the side button to silence the call. Then, I typed a single message and hit send. From now on, everything goes through counsel. Back at the house, Carter turned to Jade, looking for an ally to share his indignation. He wanted her to be angry with him, to validate his victimhood. But Jade is a survivor, and survivors smell blood in the water. "You need to fix this," Carter pleaded. "It is a setup." Jade looked at him, her face stripped of the PR smile she wore the night before. "Did you do it?" she asked, her voice low. "Carter, did you do something to give your mother evidence? She is crazy. She is making it up." "Is she?" Jade stepped back. "Because this doesn't look like a tantrum. This looks like an execution." Rory was standing in the doorway of the kitchen, holding a glass of juice. She had heard the shouting. She had heard the panic in Carter's voice, the way he spoke about me with venom rather than dismissal. She realized then that the threat he made at the dinner table to destroy her internship, to silence her, was not a joke. It was his nature. Rory went back to her room and sent me a text. "I need to see you." "Please," Carter, in a frenzy of lost control, made his fatal mistake. He sat down at his computer, his hands shaking with rage, and typed an email to me. He didn't ask for mercy. He didn't apologize. He doubled down. "You think you can humiliate me? I will bury you. I will tell the court you are senile. I will spend every dime I have to make sure you die alone in a state facility. Fix this now, or I swear. He hit send. He thought he was asserting dominance. He didn't realize he had just handed Meredith Sloane the final piece of the puzzle. At the law office, Meredith received the email, logged the timestamp, and saved it to the case file labeled Exhibits of Intimidation. I closed my eyes and took a sip of my coffee. The sun was fully up now. But for my son, the long night was just beginning. I met Rory at a small coffee shop on the edge of town, far away from the polished glass cages of Lake Norman. She looked exhausted, her young face pale and drawn, clutching her phone like it was a grenade she was afraid to drop. When she slid the device across the wooden table toward me, her hand was trembling. "I just wanted you to see," Rory whispered, her voice cracking. "I can't stand how they made you into a joke. It isn't right." I looked at the screen. The video was shaky, filmed by the man with the dog-walking app. It showed me struggling with my hearing aid, looking confused, while Carter laughed that sharp, cruel bark of his. It was humiliating to watch, but I did not look away. I watched it twice. I needed to see exactly who was laughing and who was just looking down at their plates. "Thank you for showing me this," I said, sliding the phone back. I did not ask for pity. I took a sip of my black coffee and looked her in the eye. "Rory, I need you to confirm something. Who filmed this and who was laughing the loudest?" Rory blinked, surprised by my lack of tears. "It was Jason, the guy in the blue blazer, and..." Everyone laughed. "Eileen, except me and the woman in the red dress." "Good," I said, noting the mental list. I needed to know who is worth saving when the walls come down. An hour later, I was sitting in the office of Meredith Sloane. The room smelled of old paper and expensive leather. Meredith laid a stack of files on the desk between us. We were discussing the Greystone Protocol. "It is a leadership conduct review," Meredith explained, tapping the document with a manicured fingernail. "Because Blue Heron Capital holds a controlling interest in the event of a breach of contract, we are invoking the morals clause. Specifically, we are suspending his signatory powers immediately based on credible evidence of violent behavior and intimidation." I looked at the paperwork. It was a language I understood better than love. It was the language of consequences. "And the house?" I asked. Meredith sighed and flipped to another page. "That is the part he is going to take the hardest. The Lake Norman estate is not technically his. The deed is held by a real estate trust managed by Blue Heron. Carter pays a management fee that he thinks is a mortgage, but legally he is a tenant. He is living in a dream he does not own." I nodded slowly. It was worse than I thought. Carter had built his entire identity on things I had quietly paid for. My mind drifted back to my 30 years at the Crestline Risk and Compliance Bureau. I remembered the files that used to cross my desk regarding workplace harassment and domestic threats. I remembered the women who sat in my office, bruising, hidden under scarves, begging me not to report it because they thought silence would buy them safety. I learned a hard lesson back then. Silence never stops the violence. It only gives it room to grow. I had stayed silent for too long with Carter, excusing his temper as stress, his cruelty as ambition. File the report. I told Meredith, "I want the incident from last night on the official record." Meredith looked at me over her glasses. "This could open him up to criminal charges." "Eileen, my goal is not to put him in jail," I said, my voice steady. "My goal is to take away the power he uses to hurt people. If he has nothing, he can hurt no one." Just as I was leaving the office, My phone buzzed with an alert. A friend of mine who works in crisis management forwarded me a link. It was a blind item on a local business gossip blog, but the details were unmistakable. It claimed that the mother of a prominent local CEO was suffering from advanced dementia and paranoid delusions, and that the family was heartbroken. Carter had hired a fixer. He was not trying to apologize. He was trying to discredit me before I could speak. I felt a heavy weight settle in my chest. My son had chosen his path. He decided that destroying my reputation was easier than facing his own reflection. I sat in my car and composed a single email. It was not to Carter. It was to Jade. Jade. I know you are reading the news Carter is planting. If you want to leave this circle of toxicity, I will not target you. I will ensure you and Rory are shielded from the fallout. But do not cover for him. If you lie to protect his abuse, you go down with the ship. I hit send. Miles away, in that cold glass house, Jade would be reading those words. She had spent years looking down on me as a simple, fragile old woman. Now, she was realizing that the simple old woman held the keys to the kingdom, and I was the only thing standing between her and total ruin. The phone rang at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. It was a number I did not recognize, but I knew who was on the other end. Carter had realized that I was blocking his calls, so he had resorted to using a burner phone or a borrowed line. I stared at the screen for a moment, letting the vibration rattle against the table, before I finally answered. Mom. His voice was unrecognizable. It was soft, almost boyish, stripping away the aggressive baritone he used in boardrooms. Mom. Please. We need to sit down. Just you and me. I want to explain. We can meet. I said, my voice flat, at the lobby of the Grand Hotel. In 40 minutes. Meredith will be with me. Lawyers. Mom, come on. This is family business. In 40 minutes. Carter. I hung up before he could argue. When we arrived at the hotel, Carter was already there. He was sitting in a plush armchair near the window, aggressively tapping his foot. He looked like a man trying to hold water in his hands. When he saw me, he stood up, attempting a smile that looked more like a grimace of pain. He ignored Meredith entirely and reached for my hands. I pulled them back and sat down. Mom, listen, Carter started, leaning over the low table. He lowered his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. I was drunk last night. You know how much stress I am under with the merger. I didn't know what I was doing. And you, well, you know how you get. You pushed my buttons. You said I embarrassed you. You know that triggers me. I watched him weave the web. Every sentence was a deflection. Every apology was actually an accusation in disguise. I was drunk. I was stressed. You provoked me. He was not sorry for what he did. He was sorry that the consequences were finally catching up to him. I did not argue. I did not raise my voice to defend my dignity. I simply looked him in the eyes and asked the question that had been haunting me since I drove away from his house. Carter, I said softly. Do you remember what you said when your hands were on my neck? Do you remember the exact words Carter stopped? His mouth opened slightly, but no sound came out. He blinked rapidly. He remembered. I could see the memory flicker behind his eyes the moment he felt powerful enough to crush me, but he would never admit it aloud. Meredith didn't wait for his answer. She reached into her briefcase and placed 2 single sheets of paper on the glass table between us. The sound of the paper hitting the glass seemed deafening in the quiet lobby. "These are copies of the filings sent to the board this morning," Meredith said, her tone professional and detached. "They detail the immediate suspension of your signatory rights pending an internal investigation into conduct violations. You are locked out of the company accounts effective immediately." Carter looked down, his face drained of colour, turning a sickly shade of grey. He picked up the paper, his hands shaking so hard the page rattled. He read the words, and I saw the realization hit him. This wasn't a threat. It was already done. He dropped the paper and looked at me. The boyish mask vanished. The face that emerged was twisted with a pure, concentrated hatred. He leaned in across the table, invading my space. His voice, a low, venomous hiss so the other patrons wouldn't hear. You are destroying my life," he whispered, his eyes wide and manic. "I built this, me, and you are going to burn it down because you are a sensitive, evil old woman who can't take a joke. You are a monster." I felt a strange sense of calm wash over me. For years, I had feared this anger. I had walked on eggshells to avoid it. Now, faced with it, I realized it was powerless against the truth. "I am not destroying anything." "Carter," I said, "I just stopped covering for you." The words landed like nails. Carter flinched physically. He sat back, running a hand through his hair, his breathing jagged. I studied him. He wasn't looking at the section of the document about the financial loss. He was staring at the section about the public inquiry. That was it. Carter didn't fear poverty. He feared exposure. He was terrified that the world would see him not as a visionary genius, but as a fraud propped up by his mother's checkbook. Losing his money was painful, but losing his image as a self-made man was a death sentence to his ego. My phone buzzed in my lap. I glanced down. It was a text from Rory. "I am in the parking lot. I just saw Jade crying in her car. She looks like she can't breathe. I think she wants out, but she is scared." I looked up at Carter, who was now frantically typing on his phone, likely trying to move assets that were already frozen. I realized then that this was not just about punishment. If I stopped now, if I let this be a quiet, legal settlement, he would spin it. He would lie to Jade. He would manipulate Rory. He would find another way to control them, to break the cycle. I had to do more than cut off his money. I had to shatter the mirror he admired himself in. I stood up. Carter didn't even look at me. "We are done here," I said. "You are not going to that awards ceremony tonight," Carter sneered, not looking up from his screen. "You wouldn't dare cause a scene in public. You are too cowardly." I didn't answer. I turned and walked away. Meredith, falling into step beside me. He was right about one thing. I used to be too cowardly to cause a scene. But the woman who walked into that hotel lobby was not the same woman walking out. I wasn't going to the Lakeside Business Honors to cause a scene. I was going there to end the show. The grand ballroom of the Lakeside Hotel was dressed to impress, filled with over 200 of the city's most influential figures. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm, golden glow over round tables that cost $5,000 a plate. At the center of it all was Carter, wearing a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, shaking hands and flashing that winning smile. He was there to accept the Visionary Founder of the Year award, the crown jewel in his collection of unearned accolades. He moved through the crowd with the confidence of a man who believed the storm had passed, unaware that the clouds were actually gathering directly over his head. While Carter worked the room, Meredith Sloane was executing a precision strike in the administrative office behind the stage. She did not storm in. She simply had a courier deliver a sealed legal packet to the event organizer, a stressed man named Mr. Henderson. The packet contained a formal notice of investigation regarding the keynote honoree. It was not gossip. It was not a rumor. It was a cold, hard liability notification. We did not dump a chaotic pile of dirty laundry on their desk. I had instructed Meredith to be surgical. We provided only 3 things: the audio transcript of the assault, the time-stamped medical report from my smart ring indicating physical distress, and the threatening email Carter had sent me that morning. It was enough to make any risk manager sweat. Then came the technical twist that Carter had never bothered to foresee. The primary financial sponsor for the Visionary Founder Gala was a subsidiary of Blue Heron Capital. Carter had arranged it himself years ago, using my investors to buy his way onto the podium. When Meredith activated the morals clause, it didn't just freeze Carter's personal accounts, it froze the sponsorship check for the evening. Backstage, the atmosphere shifted from celebration to panic. I could imagine the scene perfectly. Mr. Henderson was likely staring at a hole in his budget the size of $50,000. Carter was pulled aside by an aide just as he was reaching for a glass of champagne. I heard later that he tried to laugh it off. "It is just a misunderstanding," Carter stammered, his charm failing to cover the sweat breaking out on his forehead. "My mother she is confused. It is a family matter. I will write a personal check to cover the sponsorship right now." But he couldn't. His cards were declined. His accounts were locked. The organizer began to back away, making frantic hand signals to his legal team. Meanwhile, miles away from the applause, Jade sat in her car in the hotel parking lot. She had not gone inside. A messenger from my office had tapped on her window and handed her a thick manila envelope. Inside was a draft agreement. It was an exit strategy. It offered her financial independence and legal protection from Carter's inevitable bankruptcy. On one condition, she had to go on record confirming what she saw and heard in the hallway on Christmas night. Jade held the pen, her hand trembling so hard she dropped it twice. She was looking at a lifeline, but taking it meant admitting she had married a monster. At my apartment, the buzzer rang. It was Rory. She did not look like a girl going to a gala. She looked like a witness. She walked into my living room and pulled something out of her tote bag. It was my cashmere scarf, the one I had worn to dinner. It was torn at the seam where the fabric met the wool, a jagged rip consistent with a violent struggle. "I found it in the trash bin in the garage," Rory said, her voice steady. He tried to hide it. "But I thought you might need it." It proves he didn't just yell. He put his hands on you. I took the scarf. It was a small, sad object, but in the eyes of the law, it was physical evidence. I went to my bedroom to dress. I did not put on the sequined gown I had bought months ago for this night. Instead, I chose a simple, dark navy suit, the kind I used to wear when I had to deliver bad news to a board of directors. I wore no jewelry. I applied minimal makeup. I was not going there to celebrate. I was not going there to be a mother. I was dressing for a trial. When I walked out, Meredith was waiting by the door. She looked me up and down and nodded. "You don't have to be charming, Eileen," she said. "You just have to be accurate. The paper trail is bulletproof. You just need to say the words." "I know," I replied, buttoning my coat. I realized then that for 30 years, I had relied on silence to keep the peace. I thought silence was dignified. I was wrong. Silence is just a vacuum, and men like Carter will always fill it with their own noise. Tonight, I was going to speak, and I knew that the truth has a specific kind of gravity. It pulls everything down to earth, no matter how high it has climbed. I opened the door and stepped out into the night, ready to pull the sky down on my son. The flashbulbs were blinding. Carter stood on the red carpet, freezing in that perfect three-quarter turn pose he had practiced in the mirror for years. He smiled at the local press, looking every inch the king of Lake Norman. He adjusted his silk tie, soaking in the admiration of the crowd. He had absolutely no idea that 20 feet away, behind the heavy oak doors of the VIP suite, his crown was being melted down to scrap. Backstage, the atmosphere was not celebratory, it was frantic. The stage manager pressed a headset against his ear, his face draining of colour. "What do you mean the funding is gone?" he hissed into the microphone. "We can't pay the caterers." The check bounced on the main stage. The master of ceremonies was left stranded. He checked his watch, sweat beading on his forehead, forcing desperate jokes about the traffic to fill the dead air. The program was already 12 minutes late, and the oversized screen behind him, which was supposed to be playing Carter's tribute video, had gone dark. Carter sensed the shift in the air. He excused himself from a reporter and briskly walked toward the VIP lounge, expecting to find a bottle of champagne waiting. Instead, he shoved open the doors to find a tribunal. Meredith Sloane sat at the head of the long table, flanked by two grim-faced members of his own board of directors. Carter stopped dead. The smile slid off his face like wet paint. "Who authorized this meeting?" he demanded, his voice rising. "This is my night. Why are you sitting there like that? Chairman Vance didn't even stand up." He slid a single piece of paper across the polished wood. "We are voting to suspend you." "Carter?" Vance said, his tone low and final, effective immediately. "The risk to the company reputation is catastrophic." We received the files. "Files?" Carter laughed. A high, brittle sound. "This is a setup. You are trying to steal my company. I will sue every single one of you for—" "Carter." I stepped out from the shadows of the corridor where I had been waiting. I stood in the doorway, wearing my dark navy suit, my hands clasped in front of me. I was quiet. I was still. I did not look like his mother. I looked like the auditor I used to be, the woman who knew how to spot a liability from a mile away. Carter spun around. He looked at me as if I were a stranger. He had never seen me stand in a boardroom before. He had never seen me anywhere except in his kitchen or his shadow. He lunged toward me, stopping inches from my face. His eyes were wide, the pupils dilated with panic. "You?" he whispered, his breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "You came here to kill me in front of everyone, is that it? You want to destroy your own son?" I looked him in the eye. I did not flinch. "No," I said calmly. "I came here to stop dying for you." The door opened again. Carter turned, relief washing over his face when he saw Jade enter the room. He reached for her, his hands grasping at the air. "Jade. Thank God," he said, pointing a shaking finger at me. Tell them Mum is crazy. Tell them she is imagining things." Jade stood there in her evening gown, looking terrifyingly fragile. She looked at Meredith, then at me, and finally at her husband. She took a breath. "I saw it," Jade said. Her voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a knife. And I heard it. Everything she said is true. Carter froze. The color left his face completely. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He looked like a statue of a man who had just realized the pedestal was gone. Mr. Henderson, the event organizer, stepped forward with two large security guards. He looked apologetic, but firm. Mr. Hartwell, we need you to vacate the premises, Henderson said. Now, or we will have to call the police. Carter looked at the doors leading to the ballroom. He could hear the murmur of the crowd, the people waiting to applaud him. He tried to pivot, tried to summon that fake smile one last time to run back to the stage, but the security guard stepped in his path. The way back to the fantasy was blocked. I watched as they escorted him toward the side exit. I clenched my fists at my sides. There was no joy in this. It felt cold, like the winter air outside. Justice is not warm. It is just necessary. I knew this private confrontation was only the beginning. The real end had to happen out there, under the lights, where the truth could not be hidden in a VIP room. I turned to Meredith and nodded. It was time to go on stage. The master of ceremonies looked like a man standing on a sinking ship who had just been handed a bucket. He wiped a sheen of sweat from his forehead and tapped the microphone, the feedback screeching slightly in the tense silence of the ballroom. The program was in shambles. The tribute video was dead. The guest of honor was missing. Ladies and gentlemen, the MC stammered, his voice trembling. Due to unforeseen circumstances, there is a change to the program. Please welcome the managing partner of our primary sponsor, Blue Heron Capital, to address the status of the award. A murmur ripped through the crowd. People were expecting a suit from New York or a faceless corporate lawyer. Instead, Meredith Sloan stepped up to the microphone and gestured toward the wings. Please welcome Mrs. Eileen Hartwell. The silence that followed was absolute. I walked out onto the stage in my simple navy suit. I could see the confusion rippling across the faces in the front row. They knew me only as Carter's quiet mother, the prop he used for holiday photos. They were trying to compute how the woman in the sensible shoes was also the woman holding the checkbook that paid for their dinner. I reached the podium. The lights were hot against my skin, but I did not sweat. I did not shake. I adjusted the microphone. I am not here to accept an award on behalf of my son, I said, my voice clear and steady. And I am not here to apologize for ruining the evening. I am here to clarify where the money comes from. I looked out at the sea of tuxedos and gowns. For years, Blue Heron Capital has supported this community. I continued. But as the sole owner of that fund, I have a responsibility. I will not fund violence and humiliation under any name, not even my own name. A gasp went through the room. I did not play the recording. I did not debase myself by airing the sounds of my own choking for their entertainment. That would have been cheap. I have submitted audio and physical evidence of domestic assault and intimidation to the local authorities and the board of directors this evening, I stated, keeping my tone dry, like I was reading a weather report. This is not a family squabble. It is a legal fact. Then, I delivered the blow that I knew would hurt Carter more than any jail cell. Effective immediately. I am removing Carter Hartwell as the brand representative for all Blue Heron investments. I am freezing his access to the capital that built his company. Furthermore, the $50,000 sponsorship for tonight's gala is being redirected to the Asheville Shelter for Domestic Violence Survivors. Tsu. The scream came from the back of the room. Carter had broken away from the security team at the side exit. He stood in the center aisle, his tuxedo disheveled, his face twisted into a mask of pure desperation. "She is lying," Carter screamed, pointing a shaking finger at me. She is. She is crazy. She is senile. Don't listen to her." He looked around, waiting for the laughter. He waited for his friends, his networking peers, his admirers to join him in mocking the old woman. But nobody laughed. The silence was heavy and suffocating. The crowd looked from him to me, and for the first time, they saw the truth. They saw a man unraveling because his strings had been cut. I looked down at him from the stage. I did not shout. I leaned into the microphone, and my voice boomed through the speakers, filling every corner of the room. "Carter," I said. "You grabbed my neck, and you thought I would keep silent so you could shine." Carter opened his mouth to argue, but the words died in his throat. Two large security guards stepped out from the shadows and took him by the arms. He tried to shake them off, tried to straighten his jacket to regain some shred of dignity. But it was gone. The cameras that had been set up to record his triumph now swiveled to record his exit. The self-made legend dissolved in real time. As they dragged him toward the double doors, he looked back at me one last time. He looked small. I watched him go. I felt a profound sadness, but no regret. I had given him life, but I could not let him take mine. "From the moment you used your hands to take my breath," I whispered, though the microphone picked it up and carried it to the back of the room. I used the truth to take back my life. The heavy doors at the back of the auditorium slammed shut behind him with a final, echoing thud. The story was over. Thank you so much for listening to this story. I would love to know where you folks are tuning in from. So please drop a comment below and let's get a conversation going. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to Grandma's Family Diary, hitting that like button, and smashing the hype button so more people can hear these stories. Stay safe out there.